I think to be a good philosopher, you have to separate words from concepts, and also those concepts from the things that their concepts have, but especially the words from even concepts, and certainly words from the things in the material world that the words represent. So it's important so that you're not susceptible to mere language tricks, tricks of the language, illusions introduced by the language. And it's hard to do because uh, sort of the regular work of philosophy, if you just sort of are doting away at it, not in moments of extreme creativity, you take words and you wonder, well, what does that word mean? I'll take a word that's never been captured well in a philosophical sense. Love, a philosophy of love. You could start that just by thinking, well, what do you mean by love? And think of all the cases and examples of love. And then you think of paradoxes of love, where somebody does something terrible because they said it was, because of love. And you look at all of these things and you try to refine what really was love and what really wasn't, what we might call love that shouldn't be called love, by looking at the idea of love. And what you're doing there is what I've called extensional analysis. You take a word and then you look at the extension, which is all the things that it's used to describe. You assume that some of those descriptions, that's a category. And you assume some of the things put in that category don't really belong, and that you can improve that category. Maybe the category doesn't even make sense. It's not a real category. We've just been putting things in there randomly, say. And how you make those decisions is you look at the category and you make abstractions about the category, about what those things all have in common, and what those things all have in common. And as you do that, you see, well, certain of those things start to look like they don't belong anymore, and you take those out. And this is just the regular work of philosophy, and it goes a lot by liking words and thinking, well, what do they really mean? And you can't just go to the dictionary, because that's just sort of a handbook for people that don't really know what the word means, that are trying to understand it. Maybe they've just read the word. And if you really are thinking, in depth about a word, you can have more than a couple sentences to say about its use and what it might mean, and whether people are really using it in a coherent way, that isn't fallacious. So you love language, and you start to think that language really relates to the real world in this really sharp way. That when any time you move words around, it's as if you're moving things in the real world around. But of course, you aren't. No, you just have models, little models and doll houses that represent the world, and you move those. And a good example of how this can be useful is in the liar's paradox. Liar's paradox is worth a lot of thought. Anybody that hasn't thought that much about it, but probably lots of people, maybe everybody, is familiar with it. And it's something like, the statement that this sentence is not true, or this sentence is false. And the reason it's a paradox is because if you assume it's true, then you can prove it's false, because that's what it claims. And if it's false, then you can prove it's true because, as I said, it claims to be false. So this doesn't really refer to anything in the real world. A logic trick like this doesn't tell us anything about the real world. Uh, Thinking about it in terms of when I was talking about real philosophy, there's something unreal about this statement, this self-referential statement. It tells us about language. It tells us there's a problem, because this is how we advance. We solve paradoxes. And, this is related to Russell's paradox in mathematics and set theory. And, the way that we would resolve the liar's paradox would be similar to the way the mathematicians resolve uh, Russell's paradox, by talking about the constructibility and really finally taking up the issue of self-reference, or containing the self. You have weird sets that you can create in math, and it used to be that there was nothing special about these sets, but maybe they do have to be handled specially. Maybe there is an element, sets like sets that contain themselves, like the set of all things that are not France, that contains itself, because the set of all things that are not France is one of the things that's not France. And there's issues with the term, with the negation, not, and there's issues with self-reference. So um, when you have something like that, rather than thinking that you found some problem with the world, that there's some issue of truth, paradox, like Zeno's paradox that you can't cross the road, it can't be a problem with the world, because in the real world we do cross the road. It has to be a problem in the logic when you find something like that. Since you're using logic, you tend to think that, oh, it reflects back to the world. I took principles of the world, I was logical, and it should reflect back on the world. But this is when you discover that there are errors in your logic, um, when the logic breaks, basically.